Welcome to Unit 5. In Unit 5, we'll be learning about intervals. And specifically, we'll be focusing on three different types of intervals in Unit 5. A perfect interval, a major interval, and a minor interval, which we'll learn later. So the first question is, what is an interval? An interval is the distance between two notes. So we're focusing mainly on the number that tells us the size and how far a note is. So if I were to, some intervals would be a 1, 2, 3. So if I were to go from C to an E, that would be 3 notes away. If I were to go from a C to an F, that would be 4 notes away. So I'd consider that a fourth. I would consider 1, C to D, a second, because this is only 2 steps away. And then as we go on, we'll be learning more about the quality of the intervals. So there are perfect intervals, major intervals, and minor intervals. Some of our perfect intervals that we can find would be perfect unison, which would be considered a 1, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, and a perfect octave, which is usually 8 notes away from one C to another C. Would consider that a perfect octave. Some major intervals to consider are seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths. So as we learn later, we'll learn that the seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths are interchangeable between major and minor, depending on adding accidental here and there. Anyways, so we're going to base this on C major scale. Now, as you learned in the earlier unit, a C major scale has no sharps and no flats. So the first step you want to do is write out think of your keyboard or think of your scale of C major. You'll add all the notes that is required within the C major scale. So we know that C major scale has no sharps and no flats. So all these notes will be part of a C major scale. Now, since D is a part of the C major scale, that would give us the major second. Since E is a part of the C major scale, that will be a major third. A perfect fourth usually is found in both major and minor scales. That's what Cald considers them to be perfect, because you can find the same interval in the major scale and in the minor scale. So 1, 4, 5, and 8 will usually be considered perfect, while 2, 3, 6, and 7 are interchangeable based on what you have in your major scale or your minor scale. Okay. So our first question asks us to write one note of E major scale ascending above each tonic using the accidental. So we're going to be basing this scale that we're going to draw on our knowledge of E major scale. And as we learned in the earlier unit, E major scale consists of 4 sharps, which are going to be F, C, G, and D. So we're going to go across and write in all our notes ascending, going up, and then we're going to add the necessary sharps that is required to complete the E major scale. So we'll start by writing our numbers. Okay, this will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Then from 1, we'll write the note E. From E to F will be considered our second. From E to G, we can be considered our third. So it's important to write out all the notes first, and then you're going to go back and make the accidentals. I will continue to do that, and then I'll return. Okay, so I've written out all my notes ascending in the E, from the E, all my intervals. Now I'm going to go across and add all my necessary accidentals to complete. So E major scale, I do have an F sharp, so I'm going to go ahead and draw an F sharp on that one. In E major scale, I have a G sharp, so I'm going to draw a G sharp. Okay, so I'll go ahead and continue to do that. Okay, so all my intervals are drawn and all my sharps are drawn. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and label my intervals, because this should be a perfect unison or a perfect one. You can go ahead and write per if you want, or I simply write P. This would be a major second, because in E major scale I have an F sharp. This would be a major third, because again I'm basing my my higher note on my bass note, which is E, and E major scale has a G sharp, so this must be a major third. Fourths are usually going to be considered perfect, so I can go ahead and write PER for abbreviation for perfect. And then my perfect fifth, a major sixth. Now another way you can draw a major sixth is drawing a plus sign. Okay, there are different ways. Of course, you want to try and keep it as MAJ, but you can also do as a plus sign to show that it is a major. And then this will be a major 7, so I'll go ahead and draw a plus sign on that one too. And now I'm finishing off with my octave, so this would be a perfect octave. Okay, for number 2, it asks us to name the following intervals. So my first step is going to be counting the distance of the notes, and that will determine the number that is the size of the interval. So this note here is an E, and this note here is a D sharp. So I can go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this would be a 7th. This one here from C to C is an octave, so I'm going to draw an 8. This here is a 5th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that would be a 6th. This would be a 3rd, and then this would be a 4th. Okay. Now right away, I like to start by finding all my perfect intervals. That eliminates probably the amount of work I might have to do. So I know that octaves are perfect, so this should be perfect. I know that fifths are usually perfect, and then I know my fourths are usually perfect. Now I can go across and go ahead and double check my other intervals. But you should also still double check to make sure that you can make the assumption that these are going to be perfect, but you should also double check. So if I was to think of C major scale, I know C major scale has C in it, so that would be a perfect interval. This note here is going to be G. I know that G major scale is going to have D because my knowledge of G major scale, my accidental will be an F sharp. So D is still part of that scale. And then so on and so forth. Okay, let's go on over to these now. So this note here was an E, and this note here was a D sharp. Now my knowledge of E major tells me I have 4 sharps, F, C, G, and D. So since D is part of the E major scale, this would make this a major 7th. This note here is a D, and this note here is your B. In D major scale, my knowledge reminds me that I have 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp, which means that F sharp and C sharp would be the accidentals, leaving B, this is the B, I apologize, yeah, B. So leaving B to be a part of the major scale. So this would be a major 6 because B occurs in D major scale. And here's the note A. So this is A, this is your C sharp. A major scale, if you remember, it has 3 sharps, Father Charles goes. So C sharp would be a part of that major scale. So this would be a major 3rd. Okay, you can go ahead and complete the rest of question number 2. Moving on to question 3, it says write harmonic intervals above each note. Now remember, a harmonic interval is the notes sitting on top of each other. So we have 2 types of intervals. We have the harmonic intervals, which sit on top of each other, and then of course melodic intervals will be side by side. Okay, so these ones create melodies, these ones create harmonies when they're sitting on top. So harmonic intervals above. So this asks me to write a major 6th above. So I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'd find my 6th note, which is going to be a B. Okay, and then from there I'll ask myself, based on my knowledge of D major scale, does D major scale have B in it? B will occur in D major scale because my D major scale, my accidentals would be F sharp and C sharp. So B does occur within that major scale, so that would make this a major 6th. Here's the note A flat, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my 3rd, which would be a C. Okay, please ensure that your thirds are sitting on top of each other and touching. So this would be A flat major scale. My knowledge of A flat major scale tells me I have 4 flats, B, E, A, D, which means that C is not affected by any of the flats. So C is within that major scale, so this will keep it as a major. So A flat major scale would have C in it, which will leave this as A major third. And I can do one more. Here's my fifth, so I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll go on up to my F. I'm going to be basing this on my B flat major scale because this note is B flat. So B flat major scale has F because my knowledge of B flat major scale tells me I have B flat and E flat, which means the note F is not affected by the key signature or the accidentals within that major scale. So F will occur there. So this would make this a perfect fifth. And you can go across and continue to do the rest of your intervals. Okay, now coming to minor intervals. So minor intervals are created by lowering the upper note of the major interval by 1/2 step. So it's extremely important that you are aware of what your major intervals or major scales have so that you can slightly just lower the upper note to make it into a minor. So once again, minor intervals may be created by lowering the upper note of the major interval by 1/2 step without changing the letter names. Second, third, sixth, and sevenths are the ones that are going to be altered to become minor. As I mentioned earlier, the reason why it's a perfect fifth is because that fifth the reason why it's perfect intervals is because those perfect intervals occur in both major scales and the minor scale. So here is C major. My knowledge of C major tells me I have a D. So since my C major scale has D, to change this to a minor, all I have to do is take that D and lower it by 1 semitone. So if I come over to my keyboard, this note here is a C, this note is a D. In C major scale, I have D. So this would be a major interval, the C to D. Now I'm going to simply take my D, lower it by a semitone. Now it's considered a minor interval. So I can say that my C, okay, so that'll make it a minor interval. So here is the note C major third. So this is a major third because C major scale has an E in it. Now I'm going to be lowering that E to become E flat. Now it's considered a minor interval. So all I've done is taken my distance of the major and now have made it slightly smaller by making it into E flat. Now from C to E flat would be considered a minor interval or minor third. Okay, and that's how it goes on so far. So remember, thirds, seconds, sixths, and sevenths, or seconds, thirds, sixths, and sevenths are usually the ones that can be altered to become major or minor. Your 1, 4, 5, and 8 are usually going to be perfect intervals. Okay, so moving down to the bottom here, it has just a little few questions. So the first thing asks us to name the size of this interval. So from E to C, we're going to count ourselves up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this would be a sixth. Now, E major scale. My knowledge of E major scale tells me I would have a C sharp. The bottom note is 1 of the E major scale. Okay, so that's why I write my E here. Does the upper note belong to the major scale or has it been lowered by a 1/2 step? So this is where we're going to go ask ourselves, in E major scale, would I play C or would I play C sharp? And that correct answer would be, in E major scale, I have C sharp because my knowledge tells me I have 4 sharps. And then I'll come over to my keyboard here. So here from E to C sharp would be a major. And instead of playing C sharp, I am now playing the note C. So the question asks, does the upper note belong to the major scale or has it been lowered by a 1/2 step? It has been lowered. Okay, so it's lowered by a 1/2 step and no. Okay, no and lowered. No, but it doesn't belong to the major scale, and yes, it has been lowered. Okay, now we're going to be looking at the size and quality of this interval is. So the size and quality of this interval, since this C is not part of the E major scale, this would be a minor interval. Okay, then you can go ahead and do the other one.